What is divination? Definitions, history, and purpose across cultures. Welcome back. I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and this is the Mirror series, where we explore the ancient and modern use of mirrors as tools of divination, perception, and dimensional access. Before we ever hold a mirror in ritual, before we talk about psychic portals, haunted reflections, lunar scrying, or even digital black mirrors, we have to build the base. And that means taking the time to define what divination actually is. Not according to contemporary cliches, but according to the civilizational, spiritual, and functional legacy that every pre-modern society understood. That divination is a structural method of interfacing with unseen knowledge. That it is not fantasy. It is not fiction. It is not guesswork. It is not vague intuition. It is a field of trained perception, symbolic pattern decoding, and high-responsibility spiritual communication. Most people today misunderstand divination because they're seeing it through a lens shaped by centuries of ridicule, religious suppression, and more recently, social media trivialization. It's either reduced to cheap fortune-telling or aestheticized as witchy decor. But in historical context, divination was a highly respected, integrated system of knowledge. It was embedded in medicine, agriculture, war strategy, marriage contracts, coronations, temple architecture, and even land use law. In many traditions, it was a priesthood-level science requiring decades of study. Because it wasn't a hobby, it was a survival tool, a governance tool, a spiritual tool. It was how civilizations aligned their actions with the cosmic order, how they interpreted signs before calamity, how they treated illness, and how they communicated with the ancestors or the divine. The word divination comes from the Latin divinare, meaning to foresee or to be inspired by the divine. But etymology alone doesn't convey its weight. We're not just talking about prediction. We're talking about patterned insight across multiple planes of reality. In simpler terms, divination is a method of accessing information that cannot be reached through the five senses or through analytical reasoning. It is designed to uncover what is concealed, to clarify what is chaotic, and to realign the human experience with larger spiritual, energetic, or cosmological currents. But here's the most important thing. Divination is not random. It's not free-floating intuition. It's not asking the wind for a sign and hoping something magical happens. Real divination is grounded in a structure. Whether that structure is geometric, linguistic, elemental, binary, numeric, or image-based, it always has a system, and that system has rules. Every traditional form of divination, from the Yoruba Ifa system to the Chinese I Ching, from Norse runes to Mesoamerican obsidian mirror scrying, works within a symbolic framework. A framework that allows information to be interpreted consistently by people trained to recognize meaning, not impose it. And that point, trained to recognize meaning, is essential. Because what makes divination effective isn't just that a message arrives, it's that the practitioner is skilled in decoding it. This is why traditional diviners were not always oracles in the sense of receiving booming voices from the sky. Often, they were interpreters, pattern readers. They read bones, dreams, oil patterns, smoke trails, liver textures, or mirror shifts, not because they were making things up, but because those objects or states were understood to reflect deeper movements of reality. The belief was that the divine, or the spirit world, or the ancestors, or the field of destiny could be read if you knew what to look for. So the role of the diviner was to enter a state of clarity, ask the right question, and engage with a symbolic system capable of revealing what could not otherwise be seen. This also means divination was never passive. It wasn't about sitting back and hoping for answers. It was a form of conscious engagement. The practitioner had to be mentally clear, emotionally neutral, spiritually clean, and symbolically fluent. There were often long preparation rituals, including fasting, grounding, purification, invocation, and setting sacred space. In many cultures, you weren't even allowed to approach a divinatory tool, especially a mirror, if you hadn't been cleared energetically. Because the overstanding was that whatever energy you carried into the mirror would multiply. Divination wasn't treated lightly because it wasn't light. It was the act of asking a question across realms, and then waiting for the answer to take shape through symbols, patterns, images, or reactions. It was taken seriously because the response could affect major decisions: when to move, who to marry, how to treat illness, when to plant, when to retreat. And often, the answer came encoded, not direct. It was not a conversation in plain speech. It was a series of signals to be interpreted in context, through knowledge of the system and through connection to spirit. That's one of the big differences between traditional divination and modern imitation. In traditional systems, the practitioner was trained not only in the tool, but in discernment. The skill wasn't just receiving the symbol. It was knowing what it meant, when to trust it, how to verify it, and when to wait. Timing was everything. So was intent. You weren't just reading signs. You were engaging with a spiritual intelligence that had the right to say yes, no, or not now. In many cultures, divination couldn't even be done without first obtaining permission. The system had to be open. The spirits had to consent. And the practitioner had to be worthy. This brings us to an essential insight. Divination was never about control. It was about communion. It was about aligning human action with spiritual flow, not overriding it. That's why it often involved humility, ritual sacrifice, and offerings. Not because the spirits needed to be bribed, but because the act of asking was seen as sacred. It required reverence, not demand. You didn't ask the mirror to prove something. You asked it to reveal what you were ready to see. And mirrors were often reserved for the most advanced practitioners. They weren't the first tool people were trained on. They were one of the last, because of how sensitive and powerful they were considered to be. Unlike casting lots or throwing bones, mirror divination didn't rely on object patterning. It relied on direct perception. You were staring into a field capable of revealing archetypes, ancestral energy, spiritual presence, dimensional bleed-through, or symbolic images not projected from the conscious mind. It required more than system knowledge. It required self-regulation. Because the mirror didn't just reveal external insight, it reflected the inner world too. That's why mirror divination and inner vision were often trained in tandem. In mystery schools, initiates were taught not just how to read a reflection, but how to enter a trance state, how to regulate their own thoughts, calm their nervous systems, focus their intention, and keep their energetic field coherent. Because if the field wasn't clear, the mirror would either show distortion or nothing at all. In some cultures, the mirror was seen as an entity, not an object. It was referred to as a gatekeeper, a channel, or a living surface. That's especially true for obsidian mirrors, used in Aztec and Mayan systems, and black-backed glass used in Renaissance European magic. These mirrors weren't used casually. They were consecrated, fed with prayer or herbs, and stored in silk or leather. They were treated as active tools, not inert items. And part of the reason for this care was the belief that the mirror, once awakened, could show not just a symbol or a flash, but an entire scenario, a storyline. A vision of the future, a memory from the past, or a presence from another plane. And because of that possibility, practitioners had to know how to open and close the mirror properly, to cover it when not in use, to call in protection, to end a session correctly. Otherwise, the mirror could remain active and allow unwanted forces to linger or pass through. This is part of why in many cultures, mirrors are covered during death rites. It's not superstition, it's metaphysics. If a soul is passing between worlds and the mirror is open, it's considered a risk. Because the mirror is a reflective surface between dimensions, and in liminal moments, it can act as a gate. This overstanding has been almost completely lost in the modern world. Today, mirrors are used mostly for grooming, decoration, or design. They're placed without intention, left uncovered, and surrounded by noise. Most people don't realize they're energetic amplifiers, especially black mirrors, which don't just reflect appearance. They reflect frequency. This is why in modern occult revival, more and more people are returning to mirror work. But they're doing it without the foundation. Without the knowledge of what divination is, what it requires, and what happens when you approach a gate without a guide. In this series, we're going to restore that foundation. You're going to learn how divination actually works, across time, culture, material, and method. You're going to learn how mirrors were used in serious spiritual technologies, not as visual props, but as tools of communion, translation, and interdimensional navigation. But first, you had to know what divination really is, not as theory, but as a discipline. To fully understand the significance of mirror divination and why it holds so much symbolic weight, we need to study the historical integration of divination across entire civilizations. This isn't background trivia, it's evidence that our ancestors didn't just believe in hidden knowledge. They built their societies around it. In ancient Mesopotamia, the seat of some of the world's first cities, divination wasn't just a spiritual side practice, it was state protocol. The Assyrian and Babylonian kings employed entire priesthoods known as the Baru, trained experts in reading omens from the sky, sacrificial animals, oil patterns, dreams, and celestial alignments. These weren't loose interpretations. They had libraries of clay tablets documenting prior signs and their results. The most commonly used method was hepatoscopy, reading the liver of a sacrificed sheep. The liver was seen as the seat of life and divine communication. Models of livers made from clay were used to train students in how to read signs of war, famine, political betrayal, or divine favor. Nothing serious happened in public life without consultation. In China, a system of divination developed that blended cosmology, mathematics, and philosophy. The I Ching, or Book of Changes, began as a shamanic oracle and evolved into a philosophical framework. But at its core, it was always a divinatory system. You cast coins or stocks, you receive a hexagram, and that hexagram reveals not just your fate, but the flow of energy moving through your life. It doesn't tell you yes or no. It tells you how to realign. It's a diagnostic tool, a mirror of shifting energetic patterns that lets you see what you're not seeing. And in Taoist and Confucian philosophy, the ability to interpret those changes wisely was considered a mark of leadership and personal cultivation. Egypt took a different route. There, the entire priesthood was structured around cosmic order, what they called ma'at. Divination existed not to override nature, but to ensure humans were aligned with it. Star charts, planetary cycles, temple dream chambers, symbolic correspondences, they all existed to track movement between worlds. The Egyptian worldview was deeply dimensional. The gods moved through visible signs, and the human being was a conductor of cosmic order, not a creator of it. Mirrors in this context were sacred tools, not just because of their ability to reflect, but because of their capacity to absorb and transmit energy. Mirror amulets were buried with the dead. Polished bronze mirrors were used in moonlight ceremonies. In temple spaces, polished obsidian was placed beneath offerings. These were not aesthetic choices. These were intentional alignments with light, frequency, and spirit. Across West Africa, the SoS system of divination became one of the most extensive oral technologies ever preserved. At its core are 256 Odu, each containing complex stories, patterns, deities, taboos, and medicines. When a diviner casts Ifa using palm nuts or a sacred chain, they're not just seeking an answer. They're entering into relationship with the energetic configuration of that person's life. The Odu that appears is the key to a diagnostic narrative. It may reveal ancestral imbalance, spiritual interference, timing misalignment, or offerings required. Ifa is not fortune-telling. It's energetic consultation with a spiritual network, and only those trained in years of memorization, spiritual initiation, and ethical conduct are allowed to interpret it. In Mesoamerica, we find another extraordinary example. The Mexica, or Aztec, used black obsidian mirrors for divination and war strategy. These mirrors were consecrated, often backed with gold or wood, and treated as living instruments of Tezcatlipoca, the deity of fate, memory, and invisible power. Priests would gaze into the mirror, not to see themselves, but to witness messages, images, or scenarios sent from spirit. The mirror was thought to show what was hidden, inside the individual, inside the kingdom, or across time. That's why these mirrors weren't public objects. They were elite instruments, used in sacred ceremonies and war planning. And the reflections weren't passive. The mirror was said to speak back. We find similar evidence in Celtic and Norse cultures. Druids would use moonlit water, reflective bowls, or darkened glass surfaces to contact the other world. These weren't just reflective tools. They were thin spaces, designed to receive vision. In Norse tradition, runes were carved onto bones or stones, and their casting was used not only for guidance, but as a way to communicate with divine forces. Seeresses known as vulvas performed trance-based rites where they channeled visions while others recorded what was said. Their work was respected, protected, and feared. Not because they were guessing, but because they were reading accurately. From Polynesian wayfinding chants to indigenous dream mapping, from shamanic flight to Islamic dream interpretation, from Christian visions to Tibetan oracle systems, the point is the same. Divination was not localized. It was global, not marginal, foundational. It helped people understand what could not be seen and make decisions rooted in spiritual integrity, not blind force. And at the center of many of these systems was the idea of mirrored perception, that a surface could reflect more than appearance, that it could reflect energy, signal, alignment, or presence. In cultures that used mirrors for divination, whether water, obsidian, bronze, or black glass, the mirror was never treated as a blank slate. It was treated as a sensitive instrument that registered meaning when approached with the correct frequency. This overstanding wasn't metaphorical. It was operational. It was said that when you approached a mirror with intention, what appeared depended entirely on your energetic state, your level of training, and the quality of your question. The mirror would not flatter you. It would reflect truth. And that truth might come as a symbol, a face, a flash, a feeling, or even a vision. But it would not arrive on demand. It would arrive by agreement. In this sense, the mirror is a perfect metaphor for divination itself. It gives you what you are ready to see, not necessarily what you want, and it amplifies the state you're already in. If you come in fear, it may distort. If you come in demand, it may close. But if you come in alignment, it may open more than just an answer. It may open your entire field of awareness. That's why in the next segment of this teaching, we're going to shift from the history of divination to the actual mechanics of how it works, energetically, symbolically, psychologically, and spiritually. We'll break down how information is received, what makes a surface or a ritual effective, and how interpretation is both science and art. When we speak of divination as a technology, we mean it in the truest sense, a method of organized interaction with the unseen. But how does it actually work? What enables a practitioner to receive information that others cannot? And how does a tool, a mirror, a bowl of water, a line of symbols, become a functioning channel of insight rather than just an object? The first element is state. The practitioner must enter a specific perceptual state, one that's neither fully conscious in the rational sense, nor unconscious in the dreaming sense. It is a focused, alert awareness that softens ordinary filters, but sharpens symbolic perception. In modern terms, this would correspond to a shift in brainwave frequency, moving from beta, the state of ordinary logic and cognition, into alpha or theta, which are associated with relaxed focus, trance, and inner visualization. Every legitimate tradition of divination, From the Ifa priest entering ritual rhythm, to the oracle sitting in inhaled vapors, to the mirror scryer adjusting their breath and gaze, requires this internal state change. Without it, the practitioner is not tuned. And when the tuner is off, the signal is scrambled. The second element is form. There must be a structure, a format that provides symbolic pathways for meaning to emerge. That might be bones, shells, hexagrams, flames, cards, reflected light, or energetic feedback through physical sensations. But there's always a language. Divination doesn't occur in a vacuum. Meaning has to travel through something. It needs shape. And this is why trained systems exist. Because the practitioner is not inventing the meaning. They're interpreting within a context that has been established through repeated accuracy, sacred design, and lived results. A shell landing face up doesn't mean something randomly. It means what it means because of a long-standing agreement within the tradition. And that agreement includes spiritual, historical, and experiential dimensions. The third element is presence. Real divination is relational. The practitioner is not alone. Even if physically alone in a room, the act of divination opens a field in which the presence of spirit, ancestors, guides, or energies may become active. This doesn't always mean a ghost or a vision. It could be a subtle shift, a drop in temperature, a change in breath, a sudden clarity, or an image rising unbidden in the mind's eye. But in true divination, the practitioner knows when the field has been entered, because the energy shifts. A different intelligence begins to speak, not through sound, but through symbol. It's here we begin to understand why divination has often been feared, restricted, or misunderstood. Not because it doesn't work, but because it does. When practiced with integrity, it provides a view that is not controlled by those in power. It makes visible what others want hidden. It brings personal agency to the surface. In colonial periods, it was banned not because it was fake, but because it gave spiritual authority to those outside the religious state. And even today, modern institutions of science and religion struggle with divination, not because it's illogical, but because it bypasses conventional systems of permission and claims a direct line to knowledge through consciousness. This is also why divination carries responsibility. When you receive a message, you are responsible for how you hold it. If you misread it, you may cause harm. If you share it carelessly, you may create fear. If you refuse it out of convenience, you may delay necessary correction. That's why ancient cultures didn't allow anyone to practice divination casually. It required spiritual maturity, emotional balance, and commitment to truth over ego. It wasn't just about learning the tool. It was about becoming the right vessel. This leads us to the issue of interpretation. Because even when divination is working perfectly, when the signs are clear, the mirror is responsive, and the symbols emerge, none of it matters if the interpretation is wrong. The act of reading the sign is where skill lives. Two people can see the same image in a mirror. Let's say a flame appearing where there is none. One person may interpret it as passion, forward movement, and breakthrough. Another may interpret it as destruction, loss, or purification. Which is it? It depends on the context. The practitioner must ask, what was the question? What is the timing? What is the client's current energetic signature? What is the mirror actually responding to? The future, the present, or an unresolved wound? This is why, in serious traditions, a practitioner studies for years. Not because the mirror changes, but because they must learn how to read themselves, to know what they're projecting. A distracted mind can overlay fear. A tired body can receive noise instead of clarity. An inflated ego can force symbols to mean what they want, rather than what's true. And this is why mirror work is especially complex. Because the mirror doesn't just show the symbol, it also shows you. It's not filtered. It reflects both signal and distortion, so you have to be able to tell which is which. In many cultures, this dual nature of the mirror, its capacity to reveal both truth and illusion, made it sacred and dangerous. It was respected like a blade. It could pierce, but if wielded carelessly, it could wound. That's why some systems only allowed mirrors to be used during specific moon phases, in purified spaces, and only when the practitioner had undergone energetic preparation. A mirror was not just a reflective object, it was a psychic screen, a responsive field, an initiatory threshold. And the images seen inside were not always metaphor. Sometimes they were memory, sometimes presence, sometimes direct contact with the subtle dimensions. Divination has always walked this edge, between information and initiation. It gives answers, yes. But often, those answers are invitations. They ask something of you. They challenge your patterns. They stretch your identity. A real divination session may deliver clarity, but it may also disrupt your plans, force you to reassess, or show you what you were trying not to face. That's why it was never considered light entertainment. It was transformational knowledge. And like any transformative force, it had to be approached with discernment and respect. This is why mirrors remain one of the most fascinating, volatile, and potent tools of divination. Unlike external systems that rely on cast lots, fixed symbols, or coded numerology, the mirror offers a direct perceptual interface. What it shows can emerge in real time, unbound by a predetermined outcome. It doesn't always follow a structure. Instead, it responds to presence, real, subtle, emotional, ancestral, or spiritual. It acts less like a machine and more like a membrane, a liminal surface where energy begins to organize itself into shape, color, motion, or meaning. What this means practically is that a practitioner doesn't see visions in the mirror in the way people expect, like watching a television screen. The mirror might not show a full picture. It might shift, pulse, blur, refract, or ripple. The practitioner must know how to interpret these movements. Is the image literal? Symbolic? Is it a memory being surfaced from the subconscious? Or is it an external entity responding to the call? These distinctions are not always immediate. Sometimes it takes years of practice to be able to distinguish between imagination and psychic message, between an archetype from the personal unconscious and an actual signal from another dimension. But serious mirror workers train to do just that. And that training isn't only about reading energy. It's about stabilizing the nervous system. Because when you peer into a surface that can reflect non-ordinary reality, your body will respond. You might feel chills, tightness, emotional floods, nausea, time distortion, heat in the hands, or a shift in your inner sense of gravity. These are not anomalies. They are somatic indicators that something is active. And if not integrated or cleared after the session, they can linger. That's why, in many ancient systems, mirror work was accompanied by a closing ritual, a physical grounding practice, or a cleansing of the tool itself. Just like you wouldn't leave a fire unattended, you don't leave a mirror open. And this leads us to one of the most important functions of divination that has been almost entirely erased from modern discussion: energetic hygiene. In traditional systems, you didn't divine if you were grieving, ill, angry, exhausted, or disoriented. Why? Because your field was open. And open fields can pick up noise. When you're emotionally raw, you're more likely to misread signals. You're more likely to insert meaning that isn't there, or worse, invite energies into your space that you're not in a position to contain. The mirror does not filter for you. It reflects what's there. That includes unresolved fear, fragmented thoughts, or spiritual interference. This is why the practitioner's preparation is often more important than the session itself. The clearer the channel, the cleaner the reflection. The more emotionally regulated the reader, the more accurate the interpretation. That's not mystical. That's mechanics. When you begin to see divination not as fortune-telling, but as a regulated perceptual act, an act that involves energetic alignment, symbolic resonance, relational permission, and trained interpretation, you realize just how diluted modern representations have become. TikTok tarot pulls, casual Instagram horoscopes, aestheticized witchcraft trends, while culturally valid expressions, often lack the depth, protocol, and responsibility of true divinatory traditions. And this matters because when we reduce sacred systems to shallow theatrics, we lose access to their power. We forget what it means to sit in stillness, to ask without demanding, to listen with patience, and to accept an answer that might challenge our assumptions. Divination, when understood properly, is a discipline of vision. It teaches you how to see symbolically, not just in ritual, but in life. It trains your mind to recognize resonance, your body to sense interference, your emotions to respond with clarity instead of reactivity. It's not just a method of accessing the unseen, it's a method of transforming the seer. When practiced regularly and with integrity, divination becomes a spiritual feedback system. A mirror not just for your future, but for your alignment. And that's what makes it so essential in the context of mirror magic. The mirror becomes a live field, not because it holds the truth, but because it holds up a truth we are ready to encounter. Whether that's an image, an emotion, a pattern, or a presence, what comes through the mirror isn't random. It's responsive. The better your question, the better your state, the cleaner your intent, the more accurate, potent, and instructive the reflection becomes. This is why it has been used across millennia. And why, in a time of increasing digital distraction and sensory overload, it matters now more than ever. Because when we don't know how to access symbolic insight, we outsource our perception to systems that don't care about our soul. We consult screens instead of signals. We rely on algorithms instead of alignment. We mistake convenience for wisdom. And in doing so, we sever a vital faculty, our capacity to read the world through more than just logic. Divination is the restoration of that capacity. It is not the abandonment of reason. It is the integration of reason with resonance. It is how the intuitive and the intelligent begin to work as one. And that is why this entire Mirror Mirror series begins here. Before we speak of portals, timelines, haunted glass, or black screens, we must understand the sacred function of seeing. Not just visually, but symbolically. Because divination is not just about what appears. It's about how you interpret what you are ready to see. Hi, I'm Adeline Atlas. 11 times published author, and School of Soul has just released one of our most requested deep dives, the Magic and Occult series. This series is not for the faint of heart. It's for those who know there's more going on beneath the surface, behind the media, behind the family, behind the system. This series breaks the spell and hands you the map. The Magic and Occult series includes over 200 videos on 1. Entertainment or ritual. Decoding mainstream media as mass spellwork. 2. Occult families. Spot them. How generational magic and ritual lineage hides in plain sight. 3. Occult symbolism. The signs, seals, and signals used to claim, curse, or command. 4. Esoteric symbolism. Layered meaning, sacred geometry, and encoded messages. 5. Law is magic. How contracts, courts, and language are rituals of power. 6. Spells and spirits. What magic really is, and what happens when you use it. 7. Covens and lodges. Where modern ritual happens, and who's involved. 8. Destiny swapping. How rituals steal timelines, talent, or soul contracts. 9. Energy harvesting. Spiritual parasitism, and how to seal your field. 10. The clairs. Your intuitive senses. Clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and more. 11. Become magical. How to strengthen your gifts, protect your mind, and wield conscious force. 12. Miracles are real, divine intervention, faith portals, and supernatural reversals. 13. The chosen ones. What sets them apart and why they're always targeted. 14. The black sheep, the generational breaker, often isolated by design. 15. Targeted individuals, spiritual and technological targeting of aware souls. 16. Gang stalking, organized spiritual and psychological warfare. This is the most revealing, most spiritually advanced, and most protective series SOS has ever released. If you've ever felt something was off about this world, this will confirm it, and prepare you for what comes next. Your protection begins with knowledge. Join the SOS School of SoS Vault.